Hey, I'm Aaron. I'm an atheist.
I'm Steven. I'm a Christian.
This is Out of the Echo,
where two brothers share one conversation about God, the Bible, and Christianity. And today we're going to be talking about when is it appropriate for a Christian to cut an atheist out of their life, or vice versa.
Yeah, so I'm in the American South, and I've gotten to see as I've transformed into, from a Christian to an atheist, how relationships have changed and um, just being treated differently by people. That some people get more distance, some people actually almost I get closer with. They like my new worldview and they like talking about these things with someone with a different perspective. So that's why I wanted to bring this up with Steven. So obviously we have our relationship, but when you're in a situation where you're thinking, I might actually have to either restructure this friendship with an atheist or possibly even cut them out altogether, how do you feel like you'd go about that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I'd want to look at it, what does the Bible say about this? And I think the passages that probably are most likely for people to bring up, one is in First Corinthians, and it talks about like people who are in sin and you shouldn't even eat with such people. But that passage is actually talking about people who claim to be Christians, but they're living in a way that's inconsistent with the faith. And even in that passage, Paul is saying basically, like, I'm not telling you to stay away from the whole world, or else like you wouldn't be able to engage with anybody.
Right.
And so we can talk about that if that's helpful in the future. But I look at that and I go, okay, so that's not really talking about a person who is saying, I am not a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are passages that talk about being unequally yoked. And so that might be helpful. So the way that I would look at it is there's nothing that says like, okay, you have left the faith and therefore we can't be friends anymore. It's actually helpful when you say, I am not a Christian for us to like be honest with each other and with ourselves about, okay, this is where you are, this is where I am. And that's probably going to naturally change the relationship in some ways. So there could be kind of a new context or new way that the relationship looks. But the hope would be that you're able to continue to have a respectful relationship and to be able to share your ideas, just like, we talk about these things. So yeah, change the relationship. I would say definitely cut off the relationship would only be if I feel like this person is in my life and they're actively trying to pull me, or there's something about them that is pulling me away from God. Um, and so that might be a situation where I go, hey, I just can't, if this is the way that this relationship is going to be, then I don't think that we should be friends anymore, or at least not spend time together. But otherwise, I wouldn't really see a reason for it.
So you might have, say, an atheist is being like disrespectful, or you're having trouble having a constructive conversation with them. Like, do you feel like that might be more of a time to start cutting out, or like, how would you handle that if someone you feel like is not respecting your beliefs?
Yeah. I think it depends on the relationship. If it's someone like you that I've been close to for a long time, and obviously we're brothers, so we're gonna naturally spend time together unless we just decide that one of us isn't going to family gatherings and things. But even if it's a person who's been a close friend, I think I might want to start by backing up and just saying like, okay, this is a really heated thing right now. And maybe one of us is in a stage where we're always going to be coming at it from a certain tone. And so that might be a situation where I'd say, can we find other commonalities just to spend time together to rebuild our friendship? And then maybe down the road, like, I don't want to say faith is off the table, because
Mm-hmm.
that's an important part of me. And, that conversation is probably an important part of that other person. But to say like, hey, can we watch an NFL game together? We both like football, that kind of
Right.
thing. Can we just find that common ground and that love that we have for each other? And then maybe down the road reconvene in this conversation from a more respectful place.
Yeah, and I feel like every relationship, uh, it's fine to put in healthy boundaries and saying like, "Hey, you're not the issue," but when this comes up or the
Mm-hmm.
way this is said, that's becoming an issue. So can we, not have this interaction anymore? And I think I feel like that's something that if this person really does want to be a friend, they would respect that.
Yeah. I mean, one example is we're recording this in late October of 2024, and there may be some people, like I don't have these relationships where they're so close, but like there may be some cases where I'd say I don't really want to hang out with this person until after the election in November.
Mm,
Like it's just best if
totally
we
get that.
get some
Yeah.
space from that conversation. And that could be a similar thing when it comes to faith, where it's like, hey, I think we're gonna mature. Let's give it some time. That's how I would see it. But there may be some people that you say they're being really disrespectful and we're really not that close. So
Hmm.
maybe we do, maybe we don't come back together, but the investment of time is not really making sense because they're being disrespectful toward me.
Hmm.
So how do you tend to think about this from your new atheist perspective?
First, I kind of figured Christians are the only ones that cut the other side out of their life. I mean, how many times you've heard of a Christian that can't hang out with someone because they're homosexual or because, pretty much just pick the reason. But
Mm-hmm.
in my personal case, I feel like there are Christians that I've cut out of my life, even for the simple fact that I had friends that I only interacted with at church. And so the moment that I stopped going to church, I really cut them out of my life. It was more inadvertent, but it did happen. So I think there is a sense that atheists have to own up to the fact that they do still cut people out of their lives. I feel like more often it's more dramatic when Christians do it, or more of a hard cut versus, like I'm just not going to be around this person anymore. But that's been my experience. And it's also, I feel like it's just, I'm in a different season of life, very similar to when you have kids and you tend to hang out with other people that have kids. It can be kind of harder to be around single people. And I feel like that's more of like, I'm just looking for people that I'm on the same page with versus the more I hang out with Christians, it might be more resistant. It might end up in a debate. We just don't see eye to eye on everything anymore. So that's been my experience.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting, and I wonder how much of your experience is well, I know all of it is specifically like Southern Bible Belt experience because that's where you live, but I wonder if it would be different if you had the same deconversion but you lived in the Northeast, or
Mm.
somewhere that's less Bible Belt. And I also wonder for the person who's deconverting, it seems from my experience like they're more likely to distance or cut off people in relationships when they're in that process of deconversion and sort of
Mm.
maybe figuring things out, or just kind of losing that infatuation with religion or with Christianity. Um, and then that distance just kind of continues on forever. Like I've been ghosted by people where it's like they go to church one day and then you call, text, they're not responding, and then they're just gone. And so it's not surprising when a year or two down the road you find out, oh well, that person's not a Christian anymore. That probably has a lot to do with them deciding to be distant from me. Not to say that whenever these things happen I was the perfect friend, but
Mm.
I could imagine that was a big part of what they were going through, just kind of isolating and going, I need to figure things out and I don't really want to be around Christians right now.
For me, like when I was starting to isolate from the church, it was more of like the actual church versus the individuals there. Like I was more getting
Hmm.
frustrated with the Bible or what's being taught. And so that kind of started that emotional distancing, that then it just made it harder and harder to actually go there. Even though I liked the people and wanted to be with the people, it was just so hard to be there with the message. And so then you get that distance of like, okay, well, I'm not going there anymore. And so, yeah, once you stop going there, you start cutting people out of your life. But yeah, so I think I don't feel like the emotional distancing is always towards the people there. I think it's more of
Hmm.
just the assembly is what they're starting to distance from. So don't take it personal.
Yeah.
I forget what was the first thing we were talking about. The American South. Um, but yeah, I've only deconstructed once, and it was in the American South. I'd be very curious too how different it is. I think in some ways it wouldn't be different because once you've built up your community around the church, you still have that like, well, now what? Like your whole friend group
Hmm.
is from this one place. So what do you do after that? So I don't think the American South has anything to do with that. I think you're going to have that in California or wherever. The hard thing about being in the Bible Belt is where do you go from there? I mean, it's hard to find an
Hmm.
atheist. It's hard to find places to meet people that aren't Christian. I mean, good odds are if you go somewhere, there's going to be Christians there. Like that's just how it works. You go bowling,
Yeah.
you're going to see people praying over their onion rings. Like it's just what happens.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to me, yeah, just because I mean, one, the number of deconversions are probably way fewer in like the Northeast or, the far
Mm.
West areas of the US because you have just fewer people growing up in that.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting thought that the Bible Belt's going to have more ex Christians than other places. Just, I mean, if you have more Christians, you're going to have more ex Christians.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you have more Christians who grew up with that versus having come to a place of as adults where they became Christians, where I feel like you're less likely to deconvert because like you came to that as an adult versus like growing up with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I can see that. And that's also just an aspect, that's also an aspect of deconstruction. Like, I feel like deconstruction at the root of it is you were taught things and you thought you believed them, but you may not necessarily actually believe them. And so you start rooting out all these things you don't actually believe. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like that is a huge part of deconstruction, even if it doesn't lead to deconversion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Stephen, um, in my scenarios, a lot of it has been more of like small group type things. So say
Hmm.
hypothetically you're leading a small group and someone is you find out someone's an atheist in the group. Does that raise alarm bells in your mind? Like what are some of your thoughts playing out through that hypothetical
Yeah.
situation?
Well, I mean, alarm bells, like I'd obviously be sad about that and would want to have, more conversation with that person. As far as I guess the question being like, does that change? Like, should they continue to participate in that small group? Is that what you're
Right.
thinking?
Yeah, because like, so you're the leader of
Yeah.
this group. So what are your thoughts? Like, are you going to lead it different? Are you going to have
Mm.
to excommunicate with this person? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the nature of the group, and where that person is in terms of maturity. Because like
Hmm.
my preference would be that that person would continue to be able to be a part of the group if possible, because that's giving them the community. It's keeping them in the word. I think it could be like, because I just think of the small group that I'm primarily a part of right now. That would be really challenging because like I would imagine that that person would feel very uncomfortable with the amount of discussion about the Bible and how it's impacting us, and like how can we pray for you, and those kind of things. So it's like it's hard
Hmm.
to imagine a person who has not only is an atheist, like there's an atheist who's like curious and has been one for a long time, and then there's a person who just decided they're leaving the faith. Like that
Right.
person would probably be extremely uncomfortable in that, even if they wanted to keep all the same friends with that group. And so I would want to say, like, no, we're not changing the group. I mean, you're certainly welcome, but like, we're not going to change the nature of the group in order for it to be more comfortable for you. Like, I've been a part of groups where it's more focused on a topic for a temporary time. And it's like, we're going to talk about marriage and we've got these married couples together. Well, that would be, I think, that would be different. And I think it would still be, the person may not be comfortable, as comfortable, but you could see it working because it's like, well, we have issues in our marriage that are very similar to the issues that you have. And as long as you're okay with some of the conversation being around the ways that faith might be a part of that. And then there are more practical things like communication, that are more, what's the word, neutral, that they're less tied in with faith, then I could see that working. And then I think another question is, for that person, are you able to be respectful? I mean, like we talked about in friendship, like, are you able to be respectful in this conversation, or is everything come into like, that's exactly why I don't like the Bible or whatever? Well, then obviously that's not going to work very well in a small group context. And we'd probably have to have a conversation about, does it make sense for you to keep coming to this group and complaining about the very thing that's like at the core of our lives? Probably not. So I think it really depends on the situation. I certainly don't think it's a given that you absolutely have to kick someone out of a small group that you're a part of if they leave the faith. But there are probably a number of reasons why that could make sense.
Yeah. And I think you're touching on a very important thing, that maturity in this is going to be a big deal. When someone is first starting to really start to deconvert, they're probably more likely to start being more disrespectful. Probably, like, I would imagine later on they'll be like, why did I do that? But like whenever you're first starting to detach, and you might say things you regret, all that sort of stuff. So I can definitely see at first there being problems. There might just be a time period where you have to stop hanging out with someone, but hopefully you'll get the maturity later on to bring them back in your life.
Yeah, I think that there could be relationships where if the person's in, so we have an expression in Christianity that's called cage stage. Usually it refers to certain doctrines that a person will come to believe, and then that's all they want to talk about. And so we call it cage stage because it's like you should actually be in a cage right now. You shouldn't be interacting with people. And I actually think a lot of different views inside and outside of Christianity have a cage stage to them. And so that could be the case where it's like you're a new, you've freshly deconverted, you've decided I am an atheist, and that's like all you think about. And so it's all you want to talk about. And you're constantly wanting to talk about what's wrong with Christianity. And so you're being disrespectful. Well, that could be a context where you go, yeah, maybe we need some distance in this relationship. Maybe we need to back away. Or it could be a reframing. Like if you have a good relationship with that person, or you have had it, then just to say like, hey, can we not talk about faith for a while? Like, this is something that's important to you. I hope, and it's important to me. I hope that we can continue to do that. But we both like football. Can we just watch a football game together and talk about other things, just to like rebuild this relationship as we're kind of figuring out where it is?
Yeah.
And I think of it almost like, thankfully I don't have any people who are really close to me who are like this, but right now we're recording this in late October of 2024. So like the whole world is talking about the presidential election. I could definitely see having some friends where I'm like, I really don't want to hang out with that person until the election's over. And maybe a little bit, maybe we need even more time for whatever may happen after the actual election day. But it's just a matter of like, things are really heated right now. How do we get the temperature down and make it to where we can still continue to have a friendship, but not engage on this thing until we're able to do so in a respectful way? And I think that could make sense. Now, there may be people in your life that they're like that, and you're not close enough where you're like, this is really worth all the effort. I just need to get that distance because we weren't that close, and now all they want to talk to me about is this thing and they're doing it in a disrespectful way, I wouldn't necessarily say cut them off, but I would probably say like that may not be a relationship that you circle back to. But if it's a family member, like, or a person who's been a close friend for a long time, like, that's so important that you can find ways to keep that relationship going. Because I mean, just going back, I heard recently that 1 in 6 Americans is not talking to a family member right now because of politics.
Wow.
And obviously faith to me is more important than politics.
Mhm.
But it is one of those things where it's like, if we cut these people out, is the person not important to us at all? Like, to me, you are important, and my faith is like central to me, and you are important to me. Like, it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be a but situation where I have to choose. And so I think that's important in a lot of situations where you go, how can I keep this relationship when right now it's not working?
Mhm. Well, and you touch on something interesting that, like, if you had a friend that you met at church and the the foundation of that friendship was, Christianity.
Hmm.
Well, once one of them leaves Christianity, it's like the foundation of that friendship is gone. So there is a sense of like you either have to find something else to, you know, put that friendship on, or it's not going to last. I mean, what was holding it together is
Yeah.
gone. So that's a really good point. So Stephen, there's I feel like there's a difference between when atheists cut Christians out of their lives versus Christians cutting atheists out. Like, so if you're coming to me and you're constantly preaching this gospel that I don't want to hear, I might cut you out of of my life because I'm tired of hearing that. I don't want that anymore. But there are times that Christians cut atheists out because of their homosexuality, because of, what fill in the blank. How would you go
Hmm.
about having someone in your life that you disagree with their lifestyle, but maybe you still want to be friends with them, or you were friends with them before this lifestyle? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, the first caveat would be that this lifestyle is not, like, being close with them. It's not something that would be a temptation to me. Um,
I see what you're saying.
so like, if it's, I mean, you could give the example of like an alcoholic who's, they're trying to get away from alcoholism, and they've got a friend who is just like entrenched in that, and all, like, they're always drinking. Like, that may not be a healthy
Hmm.
relationship for me, not because of you, but because of me.
Right.
So like,
Yeah.
with that caveat that it's not something where it would draw me necessarily into a great temptation, or into that lifestyle, then I would say it's helpful to be honest. And we live in a culture that elevates a version of tolerance that is not the
Mm.
way that I learned the word tolerate or tolerance. It's basically like, you have to fully embrace the things that I'm about, or else you don't care about me, you don't love me. And so I think it's important to have that framework of saying, "Hey, I would love to continue to be your friend, even though you know that I don't agree with, with this lifestyle. Let's say it's, you know, LGBT, um, but I still love you. I still want to be your friend,
Mm.
and we don't have to always be talking about that." And I'm, I think even there can even be a context where maybe the person's going through a breakup, and it's like, well, I may not have agreed with that relationship, but I know what it's like to go through a breakup, and man, that's so hard. And
Mm.
like, I want to be a shoulder to cry on if you have that kind of relationship. And so I think that's important. There are so many complexities and challenges that can come with those kind of things,
Hmm.
but I think it's important that we understand that you need to have a love for people that, they may not always live the same lifestyle that you do. And
Hmm.
then I think the other caveat would be, is this a person who is saying, I am a Christian, but I'm going to live this way? In which case, for their sake, you might need to be a little bit more firm. And the Bible talks about those relationships being different from a person who says, I'm not a Christian. Well, then if you're not a Christian, then I'm not expecting you to live like a Christian. First Corinthians, when it talks about like you shouldn't even eat with those people, that's in a context of people who are bearing the name of Jesus and they're not living that way. And so it's the equivalent of, in the Old Testament, it talks about taking God's name in vain. Like, a lot of us think of that as like using God's name as a swear word, but
Mm.
it's most likely referring to saying, now in modern day, I am a Christian, and that doesn't mean anything. Like, it doesn't
Mm.
affect how I live my life. And so it's vanity, it's empty. I'm carrying the name of Jesus with no meaning to it. And so in
Mm.
those situations where a person says like, I'm going to live this lifestyle, but I still believe I'm a Christian, that would be different, where I'd have to say like, man, can we talk about this? If you say you're a Christian, let's talk about what the Bible says. But for a person who says I'm not a Christian and I'm going to live this lifestyle, then I'm just like, I want to have a relationship with you. I want to be friends, you know? So what do you think of that?
No, I love that answer. I really do. I do find it bothersome when someone says like, "Oh, you're living this lifestyle," even though it has nothing to do with me. I want to cut you out of my life. Or I've heard stories of someone like having a baby out of wedlock, and so they cut that person out of their life entirely. It's just like, but why? And especially when you have kids involved, and kids, raising kids are hard. You probably need more help. You don't need, people to cut you out of their life. So I find that more damaging to the gospel than helping anyone. But I love your distinction of, if someone's going to drag me down with them, then I probably do need to cut them out. But if it truly is just their lifestyle and what they're doing, that particular part is not a reason to cut them out. I really like that answer. All right. Well, I really like this topic. Actually, I think this is probably the most practical for everyone. Like, there are going to be times that I can't convince a Christian to change their mind. There are going to be times that you can't convince an atheist. But this is just living with people. This is something that we're all doing. We all have to live with people we disagree with. So I find this to be a very important topic. But I really liked your insight, and I thought this was great.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. I think life is messy, people are messy, relationships are messy, and so this is us attempting to step into that messiness without like really getting into everybody's case studies. So
yeah, everybody's
hopefully it's
different.
a helpful conversation for people.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right. Well, I guess we can stop recording now.